The little girl's hand was impossibly small in the cavernous marble-floored lobby of the Quan Tower. She held up a piece of paper, a child's drawing rendered in the bold, unapologetic strokes of a wax crayon. Her eyes, wide and dark, were fixed on him, completely devoid of the fear that adults always showed in his presence. She didn't see the bespoke suit that cost more than her mother's car, or the coiled tension in the shoulders of the man who stood before her. She only saw someone tall, someone who looked like he could stop the world from spinning if he wanted to. "This is my mom," she said, her voice a tiny clear bell in the cathedral of silence. She pushed the drawing forward. "Don't let them take her." Jinwoo Kwon did not move. His world, which had been a blur of hostile negotiations, whispered threats, and the unending pressure of his father's legacy, had just ground to a halt. It wasn't the plea. As strange and desperate as it was the drawing. A smiling stick figure with a wild halo of black curly hair and a bright yellow dress. Beside her, an even smaller stick figure. But it was the woman. He recognized her instantly. He had seen her only hours ago. He felt a phantom echo of the moment, a jarring disconnect from the present, the clatter of shattering ceramic. A low, frustrated curse whispered into the opulent air of his restaurant. A flash of defiance in a pair of exhausted, beautiful eyes. The woman from the drawing, the waitress. His gaze lifted from the crayon-scrawled paper to the far end of the lobby. There she was. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic as she rushed towards them, her movements clumsy with fear. And behind her, two men. Men he vaguely recognized, low-level enforcers from the company his syndicate used for real estate acquisitions. Ugly men for ugly work. They were closing in on her, their expressions a mixture of smug authority and impatience. The little girl, Maya, he would later learn was her name, didn't look back. Her faith was absolute. She had chosen her champion. Jinwoo finally reached out and took the piece of paper. The cheap pulp felt alien against his skin, a thing from another universe. He looked down at the smiling woman in the yellow dress, then back at the terrified woman whose yellow waitress uniform was now wrinkled and stained. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw it all. The fear of the men, the confusion of seeing him here, and the primal terror of a mother seeing her child approach a predator. She thought he was one of them. The final, most dangerous monster. In that instant, the cold calculus that had governed his entire life, a life of risk assessment, profit margins, and leveraged power, simply dissolved. Something else took its place, something fierce and protective and utterly illogical. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Min-jun, his ever-present shadow, his only friend. Min-jun's own eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his expression became a mask of professional neutrality. The order was given without a word. Jinwoo knelt, bringing himself down to the little girl's level, an act so foreign to him it felt like bending steel. He looked into her unwavering eyes. "I won't," he said, his voice rough from disuse in this gentle register. "I won't let them take her." He had made a promise. And the men who threatened her mother were, indirectly, his own. A problem of his own making. A rot in his own empire. And he would burn it all down before he broke a promise made to a child holding a crayon drawing. The moment had truly begun 4 hours earlier in a corner booth of Seiyon, his flagship restaurant. It was a place of quiet, brutal elegance, where deals were made that could shift the city's skyline and ruin men without a single voice being raised. Jinwoo was there for his weekly inspection, a ritual he hated. It was a reminder of all the legitimate fronts that laundered the sins of his family's past and present. He felt the crushing weight of it all, the loneliness of the throne he'd never asked for. His father, a titan felled by illness, had left him this kingdom of glass and steel built on a foundation of shadows and bone. He was watching the staff, his eyes scanning for imperfections with the predatory focus that made him so successful and so feared. That's when he saw her, Lena Washington, She was moving between tables, her steps heavy with an exhaustion that seemed to settle deep in her bones. Yet she didn't carry it like a burden. She wore it like armor. There was a resilience in the set of her jaw, a spark of defiance in her eyes that seemed to fight against the weariness. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way the women who usually occupied his world were, all polished surfaces and calculated smiles. She was real, terribly, breathtakingly real. And then it happened. A collision with a busboy, a tray laden with expensive porcelain and half-eaten desserts tipping precariously. For a second, she almost saved it, her body moving with a dancer's grace, born of desperation. But gravity was inexorable. The tray crashed to the floor, a symphony of destruction in the hushed restaurant. A collective gasp went through the room. The manager started forward, his face a thundercloud. But Lena just stood there for a beat, staring at the mess. And then Jin Woo, with his unnaturally sharp hearing, caught it. A single, perfectly enunciated whispered curse. It wasn't a word of panic or despair. It was a word of pure, unadulterated frustration, of a woman who had simply reached the last straw on a very long, very bad day. Then she squared her shoulders, met the manager's glare with one of her own, and knelt to start picking up the pieces. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize profusely. She just got to work. Something in Jin Woo's chest, a place long dormant and covered in scar tissue, shifted. It was a feeling so foreign he couldn't immediately name it. It wasn't lust. It was recognition. He saw a strength that mirrored his own, but hers was forged in the fire of everyday survival, not in the cold vacuum of power. He was captivated. The world, with all its demands and dangers, receded until there was only the woman in the yellow uniform, refusing to be broken by a shattered plate. That was the frozen moment. The instant the tectonic plates of his existence began to grind against each other, preparing for a cataclysm. For Lena, the man in the corner booth was just another part of a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. A day that had started with a final eviction notice taped to her door, its red letters screaming at her like a physical assault. It continued with her car refusing to start, forcing her to take 2 buses to drop her daughter Maya at a neighbor's before her shift. And now, this, the dropped tray. The cost of the dishes would come out of her pay, money she desperately needed for a deposit on a new, probably worse, apartment. She was acutely aware of the man watching her. She'd noticed him when she started her shift. He was impossible to miss. He wore a suit that was probably worth more than everything she owned, tailored to fit a body that was all lean muscle and controlled power. But it was his stillness that was so unnerving. He sat there like a panther in the jungle, observing everything with an unnerving intensity. When their eyes had briefly met earlier, she felt a jolt, a feeling like being seen, truly seen, right down to the frayed edges of her soul. It was terrifying. People like him didn't look at people like her unless they wanted something, or unless she'd done something wrong. As she cleaned up the mess, her cheeks burned with humiliation. She could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight. She just wanted to finish her shift, pick up Maya, and crawl into bed to face the nightmare of finding a new home tomorrow. The men who had posted the notice had been rough. They'd looked at her with a kind of casual cruelty that scared her more than outright anger. "The new owner wants everyone out by the 1st, one of them had sneered. No exceptions. Her world was shrinking, the walls closing in, and the man in the corner booth felt like another wall, another obstacle she couldn't possibly surmount. She finished cleaning, her movements stiff and robotic, and fled to the relative safety of the kitchen, his intense gaze following her until the swinging door cut him from her sight. She leaned against the cool metal, taking a deep breath, trying to push away the feeling of being hunted. Later, as she left through the service entrance, her shift finally over, she saw them. The same 2 men from that morning. They were waiting for her, leaning against the wall, blocking her path. Her blood ran cold. "We just wanted to give you a personal reminder, Miss Washington." The first one said, stepping forward. "The deadline is firm." "I heard you," she said, clutching her bag to her chest. "I'm looking for a place." "Look faster," the second one grunted, taking a step that was just a little too close. It was then that Maya, who was supposed to be waiting just inside the door of the neighboring bakery where Lena's friend worked, slipped out. Her eyes, full of a child's simple logic, saw the situation clearly. Two mean men were scaring her mommy. And across the street, stepping out of the impossibly fancy building, was the tall man from the restaurant. The man who looked like a king. Before Lena could stop her, Maya darted away. "Maya, no!" But she was already gone, a tiny missile of desperation running across the manicured plaza towards the one person in the world who looked powerful enough to stop the bad men. In her hand, she clutched the drawing she'd made for her mom earlier that day, a drawing of their little family, a smiling fortress against the world. And so the two worlds collided. The little girl with the crayon drawing and the kingpin with the world at his feet. Jinwoo stood from his kneeling position, the drawing held carefully in one hand. He watched as Min Jun intercepted the two enforcers. There was no shouting, no violence. Min Jun was an artist of intimidation. A few quiet words, a flash of something cold and hard in his eyes, and the two thugs seemed to shrink, their blustering confidence deflating like a punctured tire. They cast one last terrified look at Jinwoo, then turned and practically fled. Lena had reached to them now, scooping a protesting Maya into her arms. She held her daughter tight, her body a shield. Her eyes, however, were locked on Jinwoo, wide with a mixture of confusion and profound suspicion. The immediate threat was gone, but she seemed to understand instinctively that she had just traded one kind of danger for another, far more complex one. "Thank you," she said, the words stiff, forced. "I don't know who you are, but—" "Jinwoo Kwon," he supplied, his voice low. He didn't offer a handshake. He knew the sight of his hands, with their subtle tracery of scars at the knuckles, would only frighten her more. He simply held her gaze. "Your daughter is very brave." "She's reckless," Lena corrected, her voice trembling slightly. She hugged Maya tighter. "We have to go." She turned to leave, to escape his orbit before she was pulled in completely. "Wait," he said. The word was not a request. It was a soft command, an anchor that stopped her in her tracks. He folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, placing it over his heart. The gesture was so unconscious, so natural, it surprised even him. "The men who were bothering you. They work for a property management firm contracted by Omnicorp." Lena just stared at him, her confusion deepening. "Omnicorp is a subsidiary of Kwon Industries," he continued, the words tasting like ash. "Which means they work for me. This problem was my fault, and I will fix it." Her face went through a rapid series of emotions, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, a flash of pure, hot anger. They work for you? You're the one throwing us out of our home?" "No," he said, the word sharper than he intended. "I am the one who just stopped it. Permanently. You will not be evicted. You will not be bothered again." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the relief warring with the deep, instinctual distrust of a woman who had learned the hard way that nothing, absolutely nothing, came for free, especially not from men who looked like him, men who moved mountains with a quiet word. "Why?" she asked, the single word a chasm of suspicion between them. Jinwoo looked from her tired, beautiful face to the top of Maya's curly head pressed against her shoulder. He thought of the drawing in his pocket. He thought of the profound, aching emptiness of his life before he saw her drop that tray of plates. "Because she asked me to," he said, nodding towards Maya. It was the simplest, most honest answer he could give, and it was the one she could never possibly believe. He watched her walk away, her back straight and rigid, carrying her daughter away from him as fast as she could. He didn't feel victory. He felt the vast, familiar landscape of his loneliness, now with a new, sharp point of light on the horizon. A light he knew he would have to pursue, no matter the cost. The next few days for Lena were a study in surreal whiplash. One morning, she woke up expecting to find another red notice on her door. Instead, she found a letter from the building's management. It was a formal, groveling apology for the unprofessional conduct of the eviction agents, informing her that due to a clerical error, her lease was being renewed for another year at her current, below-market rate. The back rent she owed had been anonymously paid in full. She stood in her hallway, letter in hand, and felt not relief, but a cold dread. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a power play. This was him, Jin-woo Kwon. Her best friend, Chloe, who worked at the bakery next to the restaurant, was ecstatic. "Lena, this is a miracle, a fairy tale. Some rich, handsome guy is your fairy godfather." "He's not a fairy godfather, Chloe," Lena said, pacing her small living room. "He's a shark who happens to be swimming in my direction. Sharks don't help people. They just have different ways of eating them." The help didn't stop there. 2 days later, her ancient, unreliable car, which had become a permanent fixture on the side of her street, was gone. In its place was a modest but immaculate late-model sedan. There were no notes, just a key left in an envelope in her mailbox. The title was in her name, fully paid. She felt violated. It was an intrusion, a demonstration of his reach. He had found her address. He had found her name. He knew the make and model of her broken-down car. The thought made her skin crawl. He was stripping away her problems, but he was also stripping away her agency, her hard-won independence. He was solving her life without her permission. Jin-woo, from the sterile quiet of his penthouse office overlooking the city, saw it differently. He was untangling a mess he had created. He had Min-jun conduct a deep, brutal audit of the Omnicorp subsidiary. What he found was rot, bullying, extortion, illegal evictions, all done under the banner of his family's name to squeeze a few extra percentage points of profit from the bottom rungs of the city. He fired the entire management team, a move that sent shockwaves through his organization. The old guard, men loyal to his father's more direct methods, grumbled. They saw it as weakness. Jin-woo saw it as cleaning his house. For her. He learned everything about her. Lena Washington, 28 years old. Daughter Maya, age 6. Orphaned father, estranged mother in a different state. A talented artist who dropped out of art school when she got pregnant. Now she worked 2 jobs to keep her head above water. Her dreams packed away in a dusty portfolio under her bed. He saw the shape of her life, the relentless grind of it, and his desire to smooth her path became a physical ache. He knew the car was a risk, too much, too soon, but he'd seen the bus schedule taped to her fridge through a photo in a public social media post from years ago, and the thought of her and Maya waiting on a cold corner in the dark had been intolerable. It wasn't about control for him. It was about protection, a foreign, powerful instinct he was only just beginning to understand. He felt like a man who had lived his whole life in a black and white film and had just seen color for the first time. Her name was Lena. The final straw for Lena was the job offer. Her manager at the restaurant, the same one who'd glared at her over the broken plates, called her into his office. He was sweating. He informed her that her employment had been terminated. Before she could even process the rage and panic, he slid another envelope across the desk. It was a job offer to be the manager of a brand new high-end gallery cafe in the Arts District. The salary was more than double what she made working 2 jobs. The hours were perfect, allowing her to be home every evening when Maya got out of school. It included full health benefits. It was her dream job, and it felt like a gilded cage. She knew where to find him. The new cafe was in a building owned by Kwon Industries. She walked in on the day it was set to open, the smell of fresh paint and brewing coffee in the air. He was there, alone, standing by a large window that looked out onto a small park. He wasn't dressed in his usual armor of a suit. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater. He looked younger, more approachable, more dangerous. He turned as she entered, as if he'd been expecting her. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Hello, Lena." She marched right up to him, her fists clenched at her sides. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anger and fear and something else she refused to name. "Stop it," she said, her voice low and shaking with emotion. "Stop what?" "This! All of this!" She gestured around the beautiful sunlit space. "The rent, the car, this job. This is creepy. This is not okay. You can't just rearrange my life like I'm a doll in your dollhouse." He didn't flinch from her anger. He seemed to welcome it. "Your rent was my fault." "The car," was an impulse. "This," he said, looking around the cafe. "This I thought you might like." "People like you don't do things because people like me might like them," she shot back, her voice sharp as broken glass. "They do them because they want something." "What is it you want, Mr. Kwan?" "What's the price?" Her words hit him. People like you. The phrase he'd heard his whole life, the box he could never escape. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the proud, defiant set of her shoulders, and he decided for the first time in his adult life to tell the simple, unvarnished truth. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. Lena's angry tirade died in her throat. Of all the things she had expected, a proposition, a demand, a threat, it wasn't that. "What?" "I want to have dinner with you. I want to talk to you. I want to know what color you would paint that wall." He pointed to a large, blank expanse of white. "I want to hear you laugh without it sounding like it's been a long time since you've done it. That's what I want." She was speechless. His honesty was more disarming than any lie could have been. It bypassed all her defenses and struck something deep inside her. "And if I say no," she whispered, "then I will be disappointed," he said softly. "But the job is still yours. The car is yours. Your apartment is yours." They were never conditional. They were an apology. She stared at him, searching his intense, dark eyes for any sign of deception. She found none. All she saw was a profound, startling loneliness. A loneliness that felt familiar. "One dinner," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. A genuine smile transformed his face, and the effect was like the sun breaking through clouds. It was a punch to the chest. "One dinner," he agreed. He didn't take her anywhere fancy. He remembered the portfolio of her old artwork he'd seen in a background photo. Landscapes, city scenes, life captured in its raw, unpolished state. He understood instinctively that she valued authenticity over opulence. He picked her up in a simple black sedan, not the armored limousine he usually traveled in. He took her to a small, family-run Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, a place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. Lena was tense at first, her verbal armor firmly in place. She peppered him with sarcastic questions, testing his defenses. He answered each one with a quiet, disarming honesty and a dry, self-deprecating humor she didn't expect. He made fun of his own expensive suit, admitting he had no idea what to wear to a place that didn't have a dress code. He confessed he hadn't eaten pasta in over a decade because his father believed carbs were a sign of weakness. She found herself, to her immense surprise, relaxing. She started to talk. She told him about Maya, about her ridiculous obsession with dinosaurs and her surprisingly sharp sense of humor. She talked about art school, the passion she'd felt, and the hard choices she'd made. For the first time in years, she was talking to an adult about her own dreams, not just her responsibilities. He was an incredible listener. He watched her with that same unnerving intensity, but now it didn't feel predatory. It felt like attention. Like she was the only person in the world. He asked questions, real questions, about her art, about the way she saw the world, the colors and shapes she saw in things. He spoke very little about himself, deflecting her questions with vague answers about family obligations and a complicated business. She knew he was hiding a world from her, but for a few hours, in the warm glow of the candlelight, she let herself pretend it didn't matter. After dinner, they walked. The air was cool and crisp. They ended up in a small park, the city lights a soft glow against the dark sky. They sat on a bench, a comfortable silence stretching between them. "I haven't had a night like this in a long time," she admitted, her voice soft. "Thank you." "Neither have I," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her. He turned to face her, and the playful lightness of the evening evaporated, replaced by the same raw intensity she'd seen in the restaurant. He was so close. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the faint, silvery line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He raised a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment before they gently brushed a stray curl from her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of heat that shot through her entire body. Her breath hitched. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart, the ones built from disappointment and hardship, began to crumble. "Lena," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. She leaned in to meet him, and his lips met hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question. It was gentle, impossibly so for a man who radiated such power. Then, as she responded, as her own stored-up loneliness and longing rose to the surface, the kiss deepened. It wasn't a kiss of conquest or possession. It was a kiss of profound, desperate connection, a drowning man finding air. In that moment, she didn't care who he was or what secrets he kept. He was just Jin-woo, the man who saw her, and for the first time in a very long time, Lena Washington felt safe. It was a beautiful, dangerous lie. The weeks that followed were a fragile, sun-drenched dream. Jin-woo was a constant, steady presence in her life and Maya's. He was surprisingly, achingly gentle with her daughter. He would sit on the floor for hours, helping Maya build elaborate Lego castles, his long legs folded awkwardly beneath him. He listened to her endless stories about school with a grave seriousness that made Maya feel like the most important person in the world. She adored him, calling him Jin. Lena watched them together, her heart a tangled mess of hope and fear. She saw the man beneath the power, the lonely soul who seemed to be rediscovering a part of himself he thought was long dead. He would show up at her new cafe at closing time and help her mop the floors, the sleeves of his $1,000 shirt rolled up to his elbows. They would walk home together, holding hands, Maya skipping ahead of them. It was a fantasy of a normal life, so potent and so beautiful she was terrified to breathe too deeply for fear of shattering it. He never pushed. He never demanded. He simply existed in her space, filling the cracks she hadn't even known were there. He made her laugh. He brought her canvases and paints, setting up an easel for her in a corner of her living room and telling her, with that quiet intensity, "It's time to bring your colors back." And she did. She began to paint again, tentatively at first, then with a feverish passion. The world was no longer gray and exhausting. It was vibrant, alive, full of light, full of him. But the shadows were always there, at the edge of the dream. They were in the way he would sometimes go silent, his eyes distant and cold. They were in the hushed, urgent phone calls he would take in Korean, his voice turning hard and sharp. They were in the presence of Min-jun, who was never far, a silent, watchful guardian whose polite smile never quite reached his eyes. Lena chose to ignore the shadows. She focused on the light. It was a choice she would come to regret. The dream shattered on a Tuesday. Jin-woo had promised to take her and Maya to the zoo. Maya had been vibrating with excitement all week, but he called that morning, his voice strained, tight. "I'm sorry. Something's come up. I can't make it." The disappointment was a physical blow, but it was the tone of his voice that scared her. The warmth was gone, replaced by Arctic cold. Later that day, she saw his name on the news. There had been a fire, an explosion, at a warehouse down by the docks. A warehouse owned by a subsidiary of Kwon Industries. The report called it suspected arson amidst a rumored gang conflict. He came to her apartment late that night. He looked like a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed out. There was a fresh cut on his cheekbone, and his right hand was bandaged. The sight of him, so broken and dangerous, stole the air from her lungs. "Jin, what happened?" she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. He walked past her into the living room, staring at the bright, hopeful canvases she had started painting. They looked garish and naive in the face of the darkness he had brought with him. "They sent a message," he said, his voice flat, dead. "A rival faction. They don't like the changes I've been making. Minjun was there. He's in the hospital." "Oh God, is he?" "He'll live," Jinwoo cut in, his voice like stone. "They were careless. They wanted to scare me. Now I have to scare them back." Lena stared at his back, at the rigid set of his shoulders. She was seeing him for the first time. Not the gentle man who built Lego castles, but the kingpin. The man who commanded shadows and spoke of scaring people as a matter of business. The man who lived in the world the news reports only hinted at. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Scare them back?" He finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was one of utter despair. He saw the fear on her face, the dawning horror, and he knew the dream was over. He had tried so hard to keep his two worlds separate, but the darkness had finally seeped through, staining everything he had tried to build with her. "I have to tell you," he said, his voice cracking. "You have a right to know what you've been sleeping next to." He didn't spare her. He didn't soften the truth. He laid it all out, the structure of his life, his inheritance. He told her about the Kwan Syndicate. He spoke of the legitimate businesses, shipping, tech, real estate, that were the public face of an empire built on generations of something far darker. He explained how his father had ruled with an iron fist, dealing in everything from illegal gambling to loan sharking to brute force enforcement. He confessed that he had been trying to change it, to drag the family name into the light, but that the old rot was deep and the fight was bloody. He told her that the men who had threatened her in the alley were a symptom of the very disease he was trying to cure. "The money that paid your rent, that bought your car—" "It's not clean, Lena," he said, the confession ripping from him. "None of it is. I am the head of a criminal family. That is the truth." The room was silent. The only sound was the frantic beating of Lena's own heart. Every kind gesture, every gentle touch, every moment of perceived safety was now recast in a horrifying new light. The foundation of her new life, the one he had built for her, wasn't just cracked. It was a pit of poison. She thought of Maya, sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, blissfully unaware of the monster in their living room, a monster she had invited into their lives, a monster she had fallen in love with. "I can protect you," he said, taking a step towards her, his hands outstretched in a desperate plea. "I swear to you, I can build a wall around you and Maya. I can keep that world from ever touching you." Lena flinched back as if he had tried to strike her. The movement was a blade in his chest. "A wall," she said, her voice a broken whisper that grew stronger with every word. "It will never be separate, Jin. Don't you see? It isn't a world you live in. It's who you are. It's in your blood, in your name. The violence, the fear. You can't build a wall high enough to keep yourself out." Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and bitter. Tears for the life she had dared to dream of, for the man she thought he was. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't raise my daughter in this. I can't have her look out the window and wonder if her mother's boyfriend is the reason a building is on fire. I can't have her love a man who has to scare people to solve his problems." Each word was a nail in his coffin. He knew she was right. He had known it from the beginning, but had been arrogant enough, desperate enough, to believe his love could somehow purify his life. "Lena, please," he begged, his voice raw with a pain that went beyond the physical. "Don't do this." "I have to," she said, wiping her tears with a fierce, resolute gesture. "I have to choose her. I will always choose her." She walked to her bedroom and came back with a small duffel bag she always kept half-packed, a relic from a life where she was always one missed paycheck away from disaster. "We're going to my mother's," she said, her voice now eerily calm. "In Ohio. We'll be safe there." Safe from him. The unspoken words hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. He wanted to rage. He wanted to command her to stay. He wanted to lock the door and never let her leave, but he knew that any act of force, any hint of possession, would only prove her right. It would make him the monster she now saw. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He stood perfectly still and let her go. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob, her back to him. "The drawing," she said, her voice choked. "The one Maya gave you." "I still have it," he said. She nodded once, a final, heartbreaking acknowledgement. Then she opened the door and walked out of his life. The sound of the door clicking shut was the loudest sound Jin-woo had ever heard. It was the sound of his world ending. He sank to his knees in the middle of her living room, surrounded by the scent of her, the colors of her art, and was consumed by a silence more profound than any he had ever known. Life in Ohio was beige. That was the only word Lena could think of to describe it. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray. The houses were all shades of tan and taupe. The job she found, working as a receptionist in a dental office, was beige. Her mother's sympathy was beige, a constant, low-level hum of "I told you so" disguised as concern. "I knew a man with that much money was trouble, Lena," her mother, Sarah, would say, her voice laced with weary disappointment. "You have to be more careful. You have Maya to think of." Lena knew she was right, but the logic did nothing to soothe the raw, gaping wound in her chest. She was safe. Maya was safe. They had a roof over their heads and food on the table. She had done the right thing, the only thing a mother could do. So why did it feel like she was suffocating? She tried to paint. Her mother had cleared a space for her in the garage. But when she stood before the blank canvas, all she saw was his face, his intense, dark eyes, the sad, rare smile that transformed him, the way he looked at her as if she were a masterpiece. The colors wouldn't come. Her hands felt clumsy and foreign. The vibrant world he had reawakened in her had gone back to gray the moment she walked out his door. Maya was the hardest part. She missed him with the fierce, uncomplicated grief of a child. "When are we going to see Jin?" she would ask every night before bed. "I miss his stories." "We're on a long vacation, sweetie," Lena would reply, the lie tasting like acid on her tongue. One night, Maya handed her a new drawing. It was of 3 stick figures, a woman with wild, curly hair, a little girl, and a tall man with a sad face. They were all holding hands. Underneath, Maya had written in wobbly letters, "Fix it, Mom." Lena took the drawing into the bathroom and cried until she had no tears left, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. She missed him. God, she missed him. She missed his quiet strength, his unnerving honesty, his surprising gentleness. She missed the feeling of his hand in hers, a silent promise of protection that she had been forced to flee. She was safe, but she had never felt more alone. Thousands of miles away, Jin-woo was living in his own personal hell. He had won the war he'd promised Lena he would win. After she left, he had unleashed a cold, precise fury on his enemies and on the crumbling structure of his father's empire. He didn't use bullets or bombs. He used lawyers, forensic accountants, and hostile takeovers. It was a corporate bloodbath. He systematically dismantled the syndicate's criminal enterprises. He sold the casinos to a legitimate international conglomerate with a clause that guaranteed employment for all the staff. He shut down the loan sharking operations, absorbing the legitimate debts himself and forgiving the predatory ones, an act that cost him millions and earned him the undying hatred of the old guard. He gutted Omnicorp, the real estate arm, firing everyone involved in the intimidation tactics and starting a new foundation for ethical urban renewal. building affordable housing on the very lots they had once cleared with threats. He was a ghost haunting his own life. He worked 20 hours a day, fueled by coffee and grief. He ate at his desk, slept in his office. The opulent penthouse he owned felt as cold and empty as a tomb. Min Jun, now fully recovered and with a new, grim loyalty in his eyes, watched his friend destroy himself to rebuild an empire. "You've done it, Jin Woo," Min Jun said one night, finding him staring out his office window at the city lights. "You've cleaned the house. Your father wouldn't recognize the business." "My father is the reason she's gone," Jin Woo said without turning around, his voice a dead monotone. "This whole world he built. It's a cage. It cost me everything." He pulled something from his wallet. It was Maya's drawing, now creased and worn from being handled 1,000 times. He stared at the smiling crayon figures. "She told me not to let them take her mother," he whispered, the memory of fresh torment. "I thought she meant the thugs in the lobby, but she was talking about me, my world, my name. I was the one who was going to take her away. And I almost did." He had severed the diseased limbs of his family business. He had cauterized the wounds. The Kwan name was slowly starting to be associated with innovation and philanthropy instead of fear. He had become a man Lena could, perhaps, respect. A man who was no longer a monster. But he had no idea if it was too late. He had her new address, of course. He had known it within an hour of her leaving, but he wouldn't go to her. He wouldn't force himself back into her life. The next move, if there ever was one, had to be hers. He had to give her back the choice he had stolen from her with his careful manipulations. He owed her that much. The package arrived on a drab, drizzly Thursday morning 6 months after she'd left. It was a thick, formal-looking courier envelope with no return address. Lena opened it with trembling fingers, a knot of dread and hope tightening in her stomach. Inside was not a letter, but a set of legal documents. It was the deed to a small, beautiful commercial space in the arts district of her old city. A perfect location for a gallery with a small apartment upstairs. The property was registered to a trust, and she was the sole beneficiary. It was hers, free and clear. Tucked inside the deed was a single, thick sheet of cardstock. On it, in elegant, familiar handwriting, were only a few words. "A place for your colors, if you'll have it." And underneath, a single initial. J. Lena sank onto the beige sofa, the papers clutched to her chest. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a summons. It was an offering. A quiet, humble question mark hanging in the air across 1,000 miles. He had built her a space to be herself, free from him, free from obligation. A gesture of pure, selfless love. That night, she called Chloe. "You won't believe what's happening here," Chloe said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "The city's changing. The Kwan name is everywhere, but it's all good. Foundations, scholarships, a new wing at the children's hospital. People are calling him a reformer, a visionary." Lena closed her eyes, the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He hadn't just been mourning. He had been working. He had been changing his world, for her. "Mom," she said the next morning, her voice clear and steady for the first time in months. "Maya and I are going home." The Kwan Tower no longer seemed like an intimidating fortress. As Lena walked into the marble lobby, holding Maya's hand, it felt like just another building. The power it held over her was gone. She had her own power now. The power of choice. She took the private elevator to the top floor. Min Jun was waiting for her when the doors opened. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. "He is waiting for you, Miss Washington." The office was vast, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a god's-eye view of the city. He was standing there, his back to her, looking out at the world he had reshaped. He wore a simple dark suit, but he seemed smaller somehow, the crushing weight of his old life replaced by a different, heavier burden of hope. He turned, slowly, as if he was afraid she might be a mirage. His eyes, those same intense, dark eyes, found hers across the expanse of the room. They were filled with 6 months of pain, regret, and a desperate, fragile longing. He looked older, tired, but the coldness was gone. The man who stood before her was not the kingpin. He was just Jinwoo. Words were useless. They were frail, inadequate things to bridge the chasm that had separated them. Lena let go of Maya's hand. "Go to Jin," she whispered. Maya ran across the floor, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and launched herself into his arms. Jinwoo knelt and caught her, burying his face in her hair, his whole body shaking with a single, silent sob. Lena walked towards them, her steps slow and deliberate. He looked up at her over Maya's head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He didn't stand. He didn't presume. He just waited. She knelt in front of him so their faces were level. She reached out and gently touched the cut on his cheekbone, now a faint white scar. A reminder. "You came back," he breathed, his voice thick with disbelief. "You built me a home," she whispered. "How could I not?" And then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was not like their first kiss, which had been full of tentative discovery. This was a kiss of homecoming. It was desperate and deep, a frantic confirmation that they were real, that this was happening. It was the taste of forgiveness, the feeling of two broken pieces of a soul clicking back into place. It was a promise, sealed in the quiet of the sky-high office, a silent vow that the past was over and their future, whatever it held, would begin now. When they finally broke apart, breathless and clinging to each other, Jinwoo reached into his jacket. He pulled out his wallet and from it, the worn, creased drawing. He unfolded it carefully. "I almost failed her," he said, his voice raw. He looked at Maya, who was now smiling, nestled safely between them. "She told me not to let them take you. I didn't understand then. I thought she meant the men, the eviction, but she meant this. My life, my legacy. I was the one who was taking you away from her, from everything good and safe. I was the monster." Lena took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Look at me, Jin. You are not a monster. You are the man who listened to a little girl with a crayon drawing. You are the man who changed the world for her." She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. "You're the man I love." A year later, the Washington Gallery was the brightest star in the city's art scene. Lena's work, once born of struggle and survival, was now an explosion of joyful, vibrant color. Her paintings spoke of love, of light breaking through darkness, of finding home in the most unexpected of places. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Maya, now 7, was a happy, confident child who spent her afternoons in the gallery, painting her own messy, wonderful creations. She knew nothing of syndicates or shadows. She only knew that her mom was happy and that Jin was a permanent fixture in their lives. He was at every school play, every parent-teacher conference. He taught her how to ride a bike in the park on Sundays. He was still Jin Woo Kwon, one of the most powerful men in the city. His days were still filled with high-stakes meetings and complex decisions, but the cold intensity was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady purpose. The empire he now ran was one of his own making, built on a foundation of integrity and a desire to create, not destroy. One crisp autumn afternoon, the three of them were in the park, the same one where he and Lena had shared their first kiss. Jinwoo was pushing Maya on a swing, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He was laughing, a real, unburdened sound that carried on the breeze. Lena sat on a nearby bench, sketching them in her notepad, capturing the simple, perfect moment. He caught her eye over Maya's head and smiled. It was a smile that held all their history, the pain, the separation, the fight to find their way back to each other. It was a smile that promised a future. He walked over and sat beside her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. He looked down at her sketchpad. It was a drawing of a man and a little girl, their faces alight with joy, a drawing of their family. "It's a good drawing," he said softly, his lips brushing her temple. "I had a good teacher," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. She looked from the man beside her to the daughter who had saved them both. The shadows of the past were long, but they were finally behind them, banished by the brilliant, unwavering light of a future they had chosen to build together. This story is a powerful reminder that love's true strength isn't found in avoiding the darkness, but in having the courage to face it and change it. It teaches us that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about building a better future, and that even in the most hardened of hearts, the simple, honest plea of a child can be the catalyst for a profound transformation. True power isn't about control or wealth, but the vulnerability to let someone in and the strength to become the person they deserve. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories, and share it with someone who believes in the power of second chances. What did you think of Jinwoo's grand gesture? Was dismantling his father's empire the only way he could truly be with Lena, or could they have found another way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, we want you to choose. Would you like to see A. A story about Min-jun, the loyal second-in-command, finding an unexpected love of his own while protecting Jinwoo's new family? B. A prequel story about Jinwoo's father showing the ruthless man who built the Quan Empire? Vote for A or B in the comments, and we'll write the story you choose.